Humankind's greatest strength is arguably also its deepest flaw. In Humankind, there are 60 cultures to choose from across 6 different eras. 10 per era. As you move through the eras, you choose a different culture, kind of like a civilization or an empire. Each culture, as you can see, has its own unique building and unit and trait, and the trait carries through the whole game. So even though you change cultures and lose the ability to build your unique buildings or units, you keep that trait and stack it with traits from previous cultures. Now, this leads to some crazy things happening, and I foresee this as being Humankind's greatest balance challenge. As marketed by the developers themselves, there are over 1 million combinations of cultures in Humankind, right? And let's just take a minute to understand that. So we start off in the Neolithic era. We then move through into the Ancient era, where we choose from 1 of 10 cultures, right? You're rolling the dice between 1 and 10. Then you move to the next stage, and you're rolling the dice again between 1 and 10 to choose another culture. Or you can stay within the same one you had from the previous era. That's repeated through all 6 eras, where you choose to change your culture, or keep it the same. Change, keep it the same. 1 of 10, 1 of 10, 1 of 10. Again and again. The numbers create a crazy situation, where, as I say, there are literally 1 million different combos. Now this, to me, is the penultimate double-edged sword, okay? And what I mean by that is, this is both Humankind's probably best strength and most dangerous weakness in terms of balance and playability, and here's why. Each culture has its own affinity, right? Some cultures are scientific, others are merchants focused on money, others are industrialists focused on producing things, on industry. You could then have cultural ones, so on and so forth. Now, as you move through the game, you maintain, as I've said, your legacy trait. So if you have a look at these scientific ones here, you can see that both France and Sweden offer legacy traits to do with science. They are scientific cultures, okay? And they're not alone. Through each era, you can find cultures just like these, who provide you with buildings that give you additional researches and science, and then overall legacy traits which you keep, and they stack throughout the game, which provide you with even more science. And this is a pretty linear path to follow, right? It doesn't really take a creative genius or someone looking to find perfectly balanced quote-unquote exploits to figure out how to do a science game. Choose a scientific culture each time, right? Fairly straightforward. Where the really potentially unbalanced parts and potentially dangerous parts of this model come through are where we start to see ways to layer these cultures within themselves to create some really overpowered formations, like throwing everything not just into science, but into food and science districts that provide adjacency bonuses to each other throughout the whole game, right? There's one part. Now, it gets even more complicated still. Bear with me, folks. And if you wouldn't mind dropping a like rating, smashing that like button for the YouTube algorithm and turning it blue, I'd greatly appreciate it. Now let's dive into the next layer of this conundrum, okay? So, you've got your confusing cultures, you've got the fact that there are a million different possibilities, which undoubtedly means there are a million different ways to find something that's broken. But there's more to it. So within your cities and territories, you can also build buildings and infrastructure, right? We know that each culture has an emblematic quarter. That's a unique building. Those also provide bonuses that can be layered, challenged, and made horrendously broken through stacking different cultures that aren't necessarily meant to align. But there's more than that, of course. There's also a religious system in this game, with deep religious bonuses that apply generally just to most yields. A lot of the religious bonuses are like 10% to science, 10% to industry, 15% to food, 25% to influence, and they tend to stack as well, so you can get really crazy. And then there are, of course, wonders in this game, which provide sweeping bonuses again across the board, multiplying yields that are stackable with other higher yield multipliers. And finally, of course, there are a numerous number of other small ways that potentially unbalanced and brokenness can come in here. This in particular, the civics tree, right? You can see here this one provides additional farmer's slot for food or a trader's slot for gold. This isn't just a one-off. Look at this tree. It's massive. It's absolutely massive and ripe with opportunity for you to either specialize, focus in, and end up with literally, I'm not even joking when I say multipliers like plus 1000% onto your science if you can layer things right with the correct civics, the correct cultures, and ensuring you get your buildings right. Now you might say, okay, well that sounds a little bit niche. That sounds like, actually, in most cases it won't be that bad, and in most cases I'll be able to get around this. And you know what? I can actually see this playing out in one of two ways. Let me grab out my crystal ball and gaze into the future. So, with 1 million different combinations, okay, there's a positive and a negative. Firstly, the positives. There are so many different combos and so many different ways you could structure your empire, your buildings, different spawns and maps and so on and so forth, different opponents who will value or discredit different things, that it's hard to see a way that there could only be one or two different unbalanced strategies. And in a world where everybody is super, to quote one of my favorite movies of all time, nobody is. When everybody is imbalanced, when there are ways to go down not just science, but culture and production and money and diplomacy and everything, when there are ways, expansion, where there are ways to do all of these in a very powerful way, it actually, balance becomes a non-issue in a strange way, because everything is so strong and there are so many different combinations. The balance becomes not that problematic because there are so many different dominant strategies that you can try. The counter-argument to this is the one that I'm making most significantly in this video. It's that, sure, there are lots of different powerful combinations, but when you have so many, it becomes nearly impossible to provide any sort of check and balance across them. And inevitably, through human nature alone, there are likely to be emerging dominant strategies. Emerging dominant strategies that are difficult to control, right? You might say, okay, well, if one or two emerge dominant, we just nerf them. But we can't, because there are so many different ways to play them. In summary, humankind's greatest strength is also potentially its most significant balance challenge. Having 1 million different combinations makes it nearly impossible for the developers to keep this in check. So we rely on the fact that so many different dominant strategies will result in a game that actually is, conversely, quite balanced. Do let me know your thoughts on humankind's greatest challenge with its cultures and how they can possibly all fit together. Thank you very much for watching this video, and do subscribe for more Humankind content. See you next time.